Welcome, everybody. We will go ahead and get started. People can pop on as they may. This is a good little group to go get started with. For those of you who don't know, I'm Kate. I use she, her pronouns. I am the co-executive director of Americanized Theater alongside Garrett Kling. And we have a free summer series that we do every year with 4 virtual classes. Thank you for those of you who have attended or watched the videos from the past classes. And the last class that we have every year is a teaser for our deep dive for March and April, where we go a lot deeper into the topic. So we're really excited. This is the first year that Garrett and I are handing off this educational opportunity to another person to kind of let them take it over. And I couldn't think of a better person than Heather with her expertise in Synchro. So this will be a sort of overview of our 4-part deep dive series that will happen in March and April. Dates will come out later. But just so you guys know, if you find this to be interesting and you want to learn more, we'd love to see you again in the winter. Heather, do you want me to go ahead and put up this PowerPoint?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
And as Kate's doing that, just a disclaimer, we are in the middle of thunderstorms here. So I don't know if hopefully the internet will not go out. So if anything happens, I'll be back. It's because of that.
Same
And
here.
yeah, and you might have a dog coming in here and sniffing around. You might hear some panting. Other than that, hopefully it should be smooth sailing.
All right. I'm going to make this full screen. It usually takes it a second. And there it is. Okay. I have a little outline here. We will send this PowerPoint as a PDF to everyone along with the recording within the next 3 days by the end of the week. Just so those of you who haven't heard about us or don't know much about us, Americanized Theater is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that does education, like things like this, as well as seminars and festivals and lots of different kinds of events. And we also do performances. We have our values listed here. And we do primarily artistic and contemporary skating, although this is us doing some adjacent education around artistic ways to approach different disciplines. So what you're experiencing today will be sort of the artistic view of synchro, right? And how to approach that kind of choreography. So while it's not directly in line with contemporary skating, which is primarily what Americanized Theater teaches, we do think that the artistic approach should be something that we look at in all different types of disciplines. And it's a really fun way to kind of get to see different people like Heather and other types of skating and how those can intersect with artistic skating concepts, which is what we'll be doing today. I will stop talking now and give it over to Heather. Take it away.
Well, hello, everybody. Just kind of a little bit about me. One of the things that I've been really loving and doing for the last couple of years since 2020 is being an ISU mentor coach for the junior synchronized skating teams that are developing, which has been a really great experience. I've worked with teams from Croatia, Czech Republic, Australia, just very countries that are continuing to develop their junior teams to hopefully continue into better senior teams. So that's been a really fulfilling thing that I've been doing and kind of lends itself to this as well. Just a little bit about my background as a skater. I was a competitor with Miami University senior team, and I skated at Worlds back in the day, which is wow, over 20 years ago, which seems crazy to say out loud. I don't feel that old, but that date sure as hell feels like it is. I began coaching in 2005 with Miami University. I was there for about 4 years, and then I moved back home to Chicago. I'm in Chicago currently as well. And I was with the Starlights for since 2008. I've been with them. This year I have stepped down as director, but I still will be working with the teams here and ultimately consulting across the US and other countries as well with the ISU mentoring. So lots of things. And then for the choreography piece of it, in 2019, I was nominated for Choreographer of the Year by the Professional Skaters Association. So I think that was one of the reasons too that Kate thought of me, and we collaborated that season as well, which was really great. So, okay, enough about me. So we'll go to our next slide. And just kind of going through what this presentation is going to be about and what to expect through it. So the roadmap of what we're going to do, each slide will kind of elaborate on each of these things. So kind of going through a debrief. This is really the roadmap that I would use for kind of setting up and starting my next season and choreographing a program. So typically I would go into last season, and we'll discuss this, the specifics and how they can help it in planning for the new season. Revisiting how the program components are evaluated. So any data points are going to be helpful in, this very subjective world that we live in, especially around choreography. Really now then understanding your group, the group of skaters that you have, how have things changed in the group that can affect their dynamic and in turn maybe affect the direction of your choreography. Next will be to define the concept and the theme, so the what of the program. Moving on to planning the spatial design and the formations. So that's going to be more of the how. And then developing the choreography further. So really teaching and refining. So that's going to be more of the why. And then finally adding the musicality and expression. So we're really polishing and perfecting at that point, and that's going to be more of the why. And then finally, and ultimately, we're at the performance piece. And so that's really, you'll hear me say a lot through this presentation about connecting the eyes, ears, and mind. So did we do that with our performance? So that's kind of the roadmap we're going to use through the rest of this presentation. So go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so this is kind of what I would like to call a preseason debrief. So not only do I go through just my own teams, but you can see on the right in the image, so you're not thinking what is going on over there. That's kind of going through our competition as well. So maybe 2 or 3 other teams that I feel like we, it might be our goal to be better than or be consistent and end up in the same kind of bracket as these teams are. So really kind of going through and dissecting that program. So, this really helps guide through the next season. So it's important to look for the similarities of the elements across those top teams, as well as your own, and find those similarities, right? So when planning your program, it's helpful to see the trends, maybe in the length of time. So you'll see kind of, I know it's difficult to see, but in the blue, you can see kind of, I've written out the timing. So everybody's pivot block looked like it took about 20 seconds. Pretty standard. So I know that's something I'm going to be able to use for my following season. So those trends in the length of time for an element is going to be helpful. This can help with the placement of your elements so that, a music change isn't happening in the middle of an element. And sometimes there just isn't any way to avoid it, but how can you plan to accentuate the change in the music? Does the element lend itself to that? So you can see like there's just lots of notes that can be taken just by watching videos, looking at your protocols. Like specifically in this document, I noted the order of their elements, how long each element took, what each connection, what their patterns looked like. So in the green, you'll see, breaking down each of their connections, formally transitions, just so everybody's keeping up with lingo. We like to change our lingo as we go through synchronized skating. Everything seems to change, but our connections written out as what patterns did I see them using. And then finally, I also noted the music or the beats per minute, and then maybe how many cuts of music to kind of help me see what those trends are. Um, and then I compare them and, really went back to the protocols to see what the program component scores were after getting all those data points. With the new IJS system, we have a lot more data to dive into to really help inform our choreography and pick up on any of those trends. So, how to stay with those trends or sometimes how to break them and start new ones. Those are all things that I'm thinking about as I'm starting a new season. And really at that point, I'm really starting to focus internally and improve on the team's weaknesses and what I plan to do with the choreography also helps have a clear communication with the skaters and also the officials moving into the next season. So that's just really all the things that, there's so many ways to have takeaways that really can inform what you might want to do with your choreography. That'll take us to our next slide. So at this point, it's really about breaking down, I like to go back and really reread the program components. So it's always a good exercise for me. It's important that that language is at the top of my mind. So how the program will be evaluated is key because sometimes we get so into our creative brain that we lose sight of what's actually being evaluated. So with Synchro, there's so much room for creativity because of the amount of skaters that we can play with and create designs and formations that somehow I'm guilty of it. I could spend, I get really into an opening of a program and suddenly it's 40 seconds long. And I'm like, okay, this is not going to work as we're moving forward. So I like to go back through and really look at and deep dive into these program components. This is straight out of the communication and really try to remember, like, give myself some parameters, right? Because there's so many ways for me to just really just go off on a tangent and forget all the things that are actually being evaluated. So before I fall in love with something or with a movement, I really try to start with these at the front of my mind so that it's not something I'm trying to then rework and then I don't love it as much. So I really try to ingrain all of these pieces because each of these can be relevant and helpful when making decisions about the program just in general. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I think we go into a little bit each of the components. So really starting with skating skills, obviously, all of us, most of us understand this, but having just this, again, at the top of mind, doesn't hurt to reread it again before, going in and evaluating the group of skaters that you have in front of you and what your expectations should be about those scores. Helping you kind of come up with goals that will also then inform your skaters. What should their goals be? So really kind of the building blocks of everything that we need to, design and start the choreography from that beginning of the season. So this is something that's going to happen, typically at your tryouts, right? So you're going to have tryouts for, you're going to find out what they're all capable of as a group. This also informs which level the group should be participating in. Are they a juvenile team? Do they have the skating skills to achieve what they need to? So this is really just that foundational building blocks. We don't need to spend a lot of time here. We all kind of understand that. But it's going to inform for our next slide, which is, really understanding our group. So if we can go, yep. So when we're understanding our group, again, things that are gonna, these are pretty obvious things. how many skaters do we have? That's going to make a difference. I always love it when I go and work with a team and they're like 11, and I'm like, ooh, prime numbers. That is great. It's going to just not be able to be divided by anything, but I always like to look at it as a challenge. And sometimes it becomes just really interesting. And, it's just, you're going in understanding that it's going to be asymmetrical, right? So, but yeah, it's really kind of those things are going to inform us. So, really assessing those skills and experiences. Um, the strengths, what can they do? Taking notes of like their abilities. Can they do the spirals? Can they do the things that you need for their elements, not only their elements, but maybe some tricks, or, maybe you have one skater that can do a really beautiful Beelman. How can you highlight that and also then make that a standard for the rest of the skaters? Like, oh, if we all can do this, then next season we can have it. So this is really just one of those places where you can find all the things that you're able to really throw into your program, right? It doesn't have to be part of the elements, but what are their capabilities? And sometimes it um, triggers your brain to work, okay, we have this really beautiful X, or we have a group that can do a death spiral. Let's highlight that here. So it really also helps you kind of get those creative juices flowing and understanding what you have to work with before even starting the design of the program. I think that's it. I think we can move on. I think we're gonna hit some heavier topics a little bit later. So here's your real bread and butter, right? So composition is really where we're going to get evaluated on our choreography. So you'll see the words choreography, connections between and within elements. That's going to be formerly transitions. So kind of going through and really picking out the things that you feel your skaters could really emphasize throughout the program. So if you're working with less skilled skaters, you're not going to have as many multi-dimensional movements, and maybe you're going to have a little bit less of that. But it doesn't mean that you can't still get to your points by hitting a bullet point for pattern and ice coverage, keeping them in unison. That idea of unity, really trying to find those places where your skaters can excel is going to drive a lot of this as well. Remembering your musical phrase and form, right? So that's going to be just making sure we can hit 3 of those bullets when maybe we might not be able to use all those multi-dimensional movements with less developed skaters. So again, if you look at this, the focus is how the program is designed or built in relation to the music. That is the number one focus, and the definition, the intentional, developed, and or original arrangement of the repertoire of all types of movements into a meaningful whole according to the principles of proportion, unity, space, pattern, and musical structure. And that is consistent across any discipline in skating, doesn't matter what it is. So really just remembering these things and not thinking, oh, I know this, because it changes every season. They shift to different focuses, or it starts with multi-dimensional. Unity is going to be number 5 for most of the disciplines, but I would argue that for synchro, it's going to be one of the higher up ones. So just really figuring out where those keywords can fit in, and again, it also helps reiterating this to your skaters and what is important and why you're doing a lot of these things. So this is a piece that I feel like is overlooked quite easily, but can really, again, lend itself to data points that are helpful for your skaters, because they also, from the prior season, will have data points to point back to as
Heather?
well. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
No, we can't hear. Wait, is it just me? Can you guys hear Heather?
Can everyone hear me?
Oh, now I can. Oh my gosh. Maybe it was my internet. Okay, I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
you're
Did I
good. We also lost the PowerPoint.
I know I can put it back. I stopped it
Okay. No,
because
you're good.
I thought that I couldn't hear you, and so then I was like, "Oh my gosh, the rain did it."
The storms are
Okay, Maybe it was my internet. I'm sorry. Here we go. We're going back. I'm so
No
sorry.
problem. I'm going to take a drink of water.
Also, if you at any point want to stop the share to engage in discussion, let me know, and I'm fine. I'm fine to do that too.
Yeah, so we just got through, as you're bringing this back up, we just got through kind of the layout of things. The next four pieces that we're going to discuss are going to be more of our deep dives. So these are going to be the things that are deep dives later in the season. We'll go back and really kind of dig into. So we're just going to get a high level on these next pieces of defining the concept and theme and all those things. So those are going to be our deep dives. So we're going to spend a little bit more time and opening it up for more discussion on these next couple of slides.
Cool.
So we're on slide 11.
You want me
One
to go
more.
forward?
Yep.
Okay. Just give it a second. Sorry.
All good.
There.
Okay, so defining concepts and themes. Obviously, like I said, this is going to be the first deep dive that we kind of go into later. And as we said earlier, this is the what. So until we understand the what, we aren't really able to move on. So really, this is the point where we're deciding on a central theme, a story, a mood we want to convey. You know, this could be based on a specific emotion, a narrative, you know, even the lyrics of the chosen music. So a lot of those things can be part of where your choreography is going to go, you know, the what of what we are actually trying to convey. So that brings us to, you know, selecting our music, you know, really trying to choose music that aligns, you know, with the theme, if we've come up with a theme, making sure it aligns with that. And it also suits the group's abilities, right? So kind of remembering that as we consider the tempo, the rhythm, the emotional tone of the music, really kind of ensuring that the music is appropriate for the audience and the skill level of the performers. The next piece is going to be your attire, right? So making sure that what they're wearing aligns with the choreography, with the theme, with the mood, and really doesn't hinder the movement. Um, plan how these elements will be integrated into the performance. So, you know, take this picture, for example, right? So what does this attire remind you of? What can we guess? I'm sure I've got a couple of guesses out there. Go ahead and unmute yourself and take a wild guess.
80s.
80s for sure. What else?
Barbie.
Barbie, totally. What else could it be? I see aerobics. Also 80s.
Yeah, I was gonna say aerobics.
Yeah. So all those things, and remembering that I believe what they did was an 80s or like workout theme was what it was. So remember, but it could very well be Barbie. Like it is exactly the tone of the colors and everything. And this is pretty old. It wouldn't have, I don't even think Barbie had come out at that time, right? So remembering that whatever you're putting out on the ice, there is going to be a decision made right when they're taking the ice of what this is going to be. So keeping that in mind. Some aren't obvious as these are, but again, remembering how it can play into what you want your audience to be thinking before the music even starts. One thing I'd like to note here is being mindful of using soundtracks. So one of the things that, you know, we'll go further into this by like talking about different types of themes. Like the difference between a theme, a story, and a mood is what the deep dive will center around. Like what are the different things and how could we pick music based on that. So that'll be more what we do in the deep dive. But one of the things I like to note is to be mindful of using soundtracks. So one of like my prime example is something like using the entire score from a movie. So it's a score, there's no lyrics, it's just, the score from the movie. I like to use A League of Their Own as a good example of this. When you're using the score and then let's say you're putting the team in a baseball uniform, because that's what A League of Their Own is about, right? The women playing baseball, but it's just a score, right? There's nothing about the music. It's beautiful music, but there's nothing about the music that screams baseball, right? So now you're relying on the audience to know the scores from a movie and hope that everyone in your audience has seen the movie to place it back as to why they're in baseball uniforms. Once everybody understands that, it's fine, but it's just a cautionary thing that I want to put out there, is that you don't want to have to be explaining yourself after you've come up with your choreography. So kind of remembering that piece of it. And I'd really like to challenge you to think like further outside of the box. One of the examples I have is I used music from the movie Dinosaur. It's an old Disney movie that was kind of under the radar. Most people wouldn't hear it and remember the movie. But we made it into a butterfly program. So the skaters were portraying butterflies. The costuming was part of that. But if I had chosen like the score from Jurassic Park, which is also about dinosaurs, like, I think of it, which I totally could have used, but at the same time, the audience would be sitting there the whole time thinking, how do I know this music? Like, I know this music. What is it from? And then they're just not thinking about it, right? Your officials are also thinking about that the same way. Um, and then the next thing will be, what does butterflies have to do with Jurassic Park if they do eventually remember that it's Jurassic Park? So kind of just being mindful of these things when you're considering scores from a soundtrack. By no means am I trying to discourage it. The story and emotion is there when a soundtrack is used. It's built in, even if they are skating Jurassic Park, they don't need to look like a dinosaur, right? There's a storyline of Jurassic Park of, and it tells it through the music where it's fearful or it's happy, and all the things that you can kind of point back to. So I don't want to discourage it, because for younger skaters, it is sometimes a great option because there is a storyline that they can follow and can be a team building experience as well to kind of get them into it. But again, like kind of going back to when we're deciding what theme to go with or which music to use, really keeping in mind, the goal of the performance is to fuse the eyes, ears, and mind, right? So kind of coming back to that piece of when we get there, we want to make sure my eyes, ears, and mind are working together to understand everything. I'm going to pause here to hit if anybody has any questions just about concepts and themes,
You want me
ideas
to stop
you
the
might have.
share, Heather?
No, you don't have to stop the share. You can,
Okay.
I mean, I can see, I think it brings the person talking to the front, I think.
Okay.
I don't really have any questions, but it's reassuring to hear that's kind of where you come from. Because
Yeah.
like Synchro Gold. So just knowing like, okay, we do some things like this and just think about it that way. So it's just reassuring.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Very appreciative.
Good. Anything else? Okay. Well, that's good to know. I think when we go into the deep dive, we will again kind of break down into, more of what's the difference between a theme versus, being more conceptual with it or having an emotion tied to it, or, kind of all the different ways we can take those things. So
Sorry, I tapped it too early.
no, you're fine. It'll be a fun kind of deep dive, I think.
Okay, I do have one question. Could I ask one question?
Of course.
So last year I did do quite a bit of looking at other teams and figuring out what tempo they were choosing to skate to. Because
Yep.
some of the cleanest programs, once I really dove into it, I was like, okay, this feels slow. Like naturally, for years and years, my co-coach and I would pick music that was fun and fast, and then you don't have much time for edges and nice flow. So do you have just a specific tempo that you're like, if it's this tempo, that always works?
I don't. Mostly because I just don't believe in that, like keeping it the same all the way through. Um, it is definitely something you can do. I don't know that there's a specific tempo. I do, one of the I guess tools that I use is an app called Dance Master. I believe it's like $15 for a one-time payment. It's not like a subscription or anything like that. So it seems like it's a lot, but it's actually not. When for how much I've used it over the years, I recommend it to everybody. What I love about this app is it allows me real time while I'm playing to adjust the playback. So being able to find the rhythm that will help them show whatever it is that I need them to show in that moment. If I'm slowing it down like crazy amount of percentage and it just doesn't sound like the same piece of music, I probably then want to change it and then I rethink about it. I typically try to do that type of stuff. Like I try to select pieces of music that I'll use at tryouts to kind of see like, are they skating well to this? Do they look like better skaters if I slow it down? Do they look like, so I kind of play with it. I mean, to the point like where my skaters eventually figured out that like at tryouts, they were going to hear the music at some point, and then it was like, a game of which piece it was. But I mean, it definitely is something, even if it's after tryouts, you have the whole team together trying to find what tempo works best for them, because sometimes really slow music isn't great for a prelim group that's going to be like ahead of the music the entire time, right? So it varies for me based on what I want them to get out of that season, right? So if you have a prelim team that you're trying to take to pre-juve, or a pre-juve team you're trying to take to juvenile, what is the next step for them, right? What are you trying to give them by the end of the season? And that might be, can they learn to hear the music, learn to do the slower tempo to show those things? So maybe you pick a piece of music that is that tempo, and it might not be the whole program, but it might be a part of it that you really want them to understand, and kind of using your season as a building block depending on where your group sits, and if they're kind of a group, every club is different, right? It might be a group that's been together and they've just stayed together and they've gone through each division together. Or it might be you've brought in, only 3 new skaters. So it's going to be really easy for those 3 new skaters to kind of maybe learn that new style with that group. So there's so many things. I feel like I'm not answering your question. There's so many ways you can think about music and, um, really play with it to kind of fit your group. And I think that's why I spent so much time on that first part, really talking about your group, because there's so many different ways to look at it.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? Any specific questions? It'll help somebody somewhere. Okay, I think we can go on to the next one. Okay, so designs and formations. So this is going to be our deep dive number 2. This kind of gets into the how. So once we've kind of figured out the what of the program, what's our theme going to be, what's the music, all the kids, what they can do, now we get into the wow. The wow. The how.
Also the wow.
I know, also the wow. This is my favorite part. Like, so I could talk about this for days. I love doing this. But yeah, so this is the part where we're going to select the order of our elements. this is where, we go back to using those timings we discovered in the debrief of last season and comparing, like you said, going back and looking at what the other teams might have been using, what's been successful for them. Is it also something that can be successful for us? I mean, I think I listen to the music maybe a million times, it feels like. I think every time I get in the car, I'm listening to it. What else can I hear? I usually sit down and map out, the phrases with counts. So you can kind of see that middle picture there is kind of my mind map of the counts of 8, things I hear. I'm not like, I don't read music. I can, but it's not something I'm trained in. So this is just kind of my mind map of how I hear the music, and I like to think it's maybe what the audience might hear if I can connect the eyes with the ear, and really kind of bring it to life with that piece. So anyway, I listened to it about a million times, mapping out all the counts, and I note things I hear, and really it's more so I note them so I remember to highlight them later, because it's not something that's really going to happen right away. I usually note how long each phrase or section is with seconds, because that goes back again to that debrief. And then I try to look at the entire notation and see like where can elements fit, without having it switch pieces or phrases in the middle of an element. If I have 5 counts of 8 and that is 20 seconds, that's where the tempo kind of, for me, it's more about the timing of it, right? So the 20 seconds, 5 counts of 8 feels really short for 20 seconds, but that means I'm going to double time some steps, right? So it just kind of gives me this building block for me to understand what I'm going to have to communicate with my skaters. Is it high level? Is it something that I'm going to have to like break down and say the steps to the music? And really try to help them that way. Again, kind of going back to that Dance Master app. It's another really great app to be able to break down, while I'm listening to the music. I can do my notations in that app. I can make notes in the app. I can slow it down. I can say, okay, this part right now is 3% slower, but maybe eventually as they get better and more comfortable with things, I can speed it up to 2%, 1%, and then eventually 0%. So kind of playing with that, I think that's going to be a big part of our deep dive as well, is going into the actual tool of Dance Master and how I use it. So if you all want to be ahead of the game, I would suggest downloading Dance Master. I promise you it is worth every penny. Anyway, back to this. Really it's kind of, is there a specific place in the music that I envision an element, right? So again, connecting the ear to the eye, lots of times we can hear intersections really easy. Where's the big crescendo in the music that's going to be my intersection? And that's going to be more of like a whip intersection, because it's, all happens at the same time, versus maybe a triangle intersection doesn't really need as big of a crash because it doesn't all happen at one time. It takes 2 8 counts or an 8 count to get through the whole thing. So kind of remembering those pieces when listening to the music, and listening for places where these elements might go, on top of also looking at the timing. So once I find that place where I'm like, oh, this speaks to me right here, I make sure that I have enough time before and after it, so I'm not also kind of just shoving something in and it doesn't work at the end of the day. Let's see. Okay, so mapping out the formations. You can kind of see on the first picture on the left is some of my notations of, mapping out the circles and, sketching out different formations, that align with, the music and the theme, right? So kind of remembering those pieces as well. Considering how the skaters are going to transition between these formations. And really, the biggest piece that I can't stress enough when we go into our deep dive on this is going to be remembering to think about how the blade should move across the ice, right? So it's really easy to get stuck in the idea of the group and how the group and drawing on, drawing shapes that make sense and they look like they're going to look like something. And it's just being forced onto the skaters. So really trying to remember, how do we ice skate, right? So even when we're drawing on paper, just formations, really remembering, okay, how does my blade work? How should it move across the ice? So that the movements don't become awkward for the group. And, sometimes there's always one skater that's going to feel awkward to make the thing happen. And that happens everywhere. Knowing which skater has that awkward movement is half the battle, right? So being able to communicate, hey, this isn't going to feel great, but it's going to look just fine, right? And sometimes that's half the battle, is just getting them to understand that, like, you're going to feel weird and it doesn't look weird, promise. And then the other thing, I also like to draw out like the entire program. Just kind of thinking through doing it on paper, and then I can see if my ideas are also covering the ice, right, as a whole. And this helps me kind of internalize the big picture. Um, once we start building it on the ice, things might change. So at least understanding the big picture of where I thought things were go, if they change, how that's going to affect the next piece. So I try to kind of map out as much as I can what my ideas are. And it's not everything. It might just be as simple as, okay, I know the circle is going to do this, this, and this. And it's mostly I map out more elements than I do the actual connections between the elements. I typically do the formations of the elements first to see where that ice coverage is. And then again, it's kind of, I like to think of everything as how I'm laying it out, then becomes, I guess you would say, like, it's creativity, but it's confined. It doesn't allow me to go outside of the box, but it allows me to say, okay, we have our circle here and we had our pivot block before this. I don't want to, I want to show something else. What's a different formation? How can I connect these two things where you don't see the two things before and after? So those are the types of things that I like to do first. I see we have a hand up.
I do have my hand up. It took me
Yeah.
like 30 seconds to figure out where the hand raise was on Zoom. Sorry.
All good.
So backtrack a little bit. When you were talking about mapping stuff out and talking about how the blade works on the ice and how sometimes you have the best intentions and it doesn't pan out. Do you skate out your patterns before you teach them to your team to feel how it feels in your blades ahead of time?
Yeah, if there is something that I'm really unsure about, I always get on the ice and try to go through. I typically am doing that also when it's like, okay, we're all going to the same place, but there might be two of these groups have to do some different type of steps, and making sure those steps are all at the same time, but they might have a shift instead of a crossover because they have to, come back on the ice, whereas this group has to shift over, right? So those two things are going to be different, and it's okay that they're slightly different, just making sure that I skate it out and think, okay, where do I need to go versus where you need to go? Do those steps need to be the same? Can they be the same? Or does it make sense to just shift it a little bit so that the rhythm is still there, but we get where we're going when we need to? So I do tend to skate out quite a bit of it, at least within the elements for sure.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. But like I said, I do like to do the elements first. I think that it allows me to not go crazy with my creativity. So I think I like to challenge myself. So I think the way I've always approached choreography and creativity has been different than most, I think. I love the challenge of it more so than I like the freedom, right? So I've always lived my life of choreography within those parameters. When I really started coaching on my own, after leaving Miami is when the IJS really came into the forefront for Synchro. And so I kind of grew up becoming a choreographer within those parameters. And so I've really always loved the challenge of it, really trying to work within a space and how creative can I get. So I've always loved the challenge more than I've thought about losing the freedom, if that makes sense. So it does help me a lot. And I feel like it also kind of helps me do different work continually, where my programs don't all look the same because I'm always thinking of the challenge, and how can I do it differently, and economically, or whatever it needs to be for that team in that time frame. Let's see, where are we at?
There's this video. Did you want to do the little video thing?
Oh yeah, let's look at this. So this is just kind of like a scroll through my notebook. You can go ahead and hit play.
Okay,
It goes
I
through
hope
kind
it
of,
works.
there it is. So it's kind of going through my notebook and just draws. I just pulled a random rink diagram off the internet and threw it in my notebook. I live and die by my iPad. It's the easiest way for me to have everything in one place. Taking pictures, videos, and it all can be dropped into a notebook, and you can kind of see some of those things. Color coding works for me. So I live and die by the notebook. The app that I use is Bamboo Paper is one that you're seeing here that kind of scrolls through. The newest one that I found that I like even better is called Good Notes, and it allows me, I think I've also dropped video into that notebook, but it's a great app. It allows me to have multiple notebooks and access them a little bit easier. So I usually have in my Good Notes, I have all of the rules there in that notebook, so I can flip back and forth between those. But it's a really great app that I use when I'm kind of in this mode of designing programs and thinking about that choreography. Okay, so where are we at? Oh, so we kind of started talking about the entire program and mapping that out.
Wait, are we staying on the other one or are we moving forward?
Oh no, stay on the other one real quick. I just have a couple of last thoughts. Perfect. So sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Again, I kind of was talking about the big picture and trying to map it out so I can internalize really the big picture that we're building on the ice. And if it changes, if this, then that kind of a thing. And then basically it helps me have an idea of not losing sight of how I'm utilizing the space, right? So, planning how the group's going to use the entire ice surface and then making sure that it's visually engaging from all angles, right? So that kind of helps me get that big picture of, have I hit all of the places I want to? And if I'm not yet, how can I intentionally make sure I do come back to that when I'm using my connections between elements? And then lastly, kind of hitting on that symmetrical versus asymmetrical. So I typically use, symmetry when I'm thinking about things. I really use symmetry for more of the technical elements, because I know those things need to be really seen, and, I don't want to disguise them too much with too much creativity that they can't be seen. So really trying to walk a fine line, but I typically keep it symmetrical so that I can layer in different things, which we'll get to later. And then maybe kind of thinking more of my connections is where I'm going to have some asymmetry with, more dynamic, expressive connections, or maybe even like my elements or my sections without a hold, right? So like your no hold, maybe your twizzle, parts of your circle travel might be disconnected. So really kind of thinking of your asymmetrical pieces being in those types of elements. All right, cool. I think we can go on to the next slide. Does anybody else have any other questions? Cool. Okay, so again, we don't really need to spend a ton of time here. Obviously, like with the presentation, expressiveness, projection, variety and contrast. So this is going to be where we are really kind of digging into that musical sensitivity and timing. You know, and again, like this last bullet point, oneness, awareness of space, really kind of being able to be unified and in sync. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay. So developing the choreo, this is going to be our third deep dive. So this is going to be the why. You know, at this point, you know, we're still continuing to layer in the how, but we're remembering the why. This stage of the why is like to build on the key points in our program components and increase the content and hopefully then the score. And some of those layers are going to be things like handholds, individual body movements, head movements, end arms if they're connected, pair moves or tricks to enhance the music. Hopefully it's not just because, like, we want to make sure we're hitting those musical notes. Maybe putting in some slides, knee slides or partner slides. So why don't we go ahead and we're going to watch this video. Hopefully it's going to work just fine.
I
And
don't know if it will. I can try to push play, but I can try to push play.
you might have to like do a control to make it work. I don't know. If not, we can send out the, oh, look at you.
Is it sticky for everybody?
Sticky. Okay, let me see if I can. Yeah. I
Is it
kind
kind
of
of
want to,
sticky?
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can. Do you have the link to throw in the chat or do you want me
I
to try and
do.
find it?
I do.
Let's throw it in the chat and have everybody take a minute or two to watch it on their own. Because I really want to just chat a little bit about like any of the things that you're seeing. Like, again, this is going to be, you know, Lacey Proms from 2023 doing On Ice Perspectives. Shout out for On Ice Perspectives that this is the video for that. And you know, again, this is higher level, but hopefully you can kind of see some of the things. So as you're watching it, just note some of the layers that you're seeing that is beyond just the formations and the movement on the ice, the formation and pattern. I want to say it's like a 3-minute video, maybe. So go ahead and take a couple of minutes. Let me know when you've all kind of finished. Okay, so as you're kind of finishing up, um, let's just kind of start discussion. So what were the things that stood out to you where you felt like you could see the music, right? I like to say you could see the music, the parts that you really felt in there. And then what were some of those layers that accented the music for you?
Well, I just love all the fine detail of like head movement and arms and just various level changes and yeah, crossovers, not just a crossover. And just and then touching on lyrics, even I rise above, and it seems effortless at their level.
Yeah,
But it
for
seems
sure.
effortless, but it's so impactful. It's really, really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, and I would also argue that a lot of those things can be done even with lower level athletes, right? So when we're talking about kind of those layers, really trying to find places where they can hear it, right? So rising up, like that's something that they can easily hear, and it's so fun choreographing with younger kids that are just like, "Oh my God, that's so cool." And it's like, just an arm movement that hits it in the right way and they're super excited about it. So, I think these are the kind of fun things that end up going into the program and can be made really fun to with the skaters no matter what the level is as well.
I felt like it just drew you in right away. And even if I had it muted, I could just tell by the energy of the skaters and the way they were performing the piece, you could tell what type of music it was.
Yeah.
Even if it was muted, because they were, matching that with their energy all the way through. And also it was interesting too, obviously it's a very high level team that you couldn't look at that, even watching it for 3 minutes, I couldn't tell you who the strongest skater on the team was and who the weakest skater on the team was because they were all my eyes, nobody was sticking out.
Yeah.
People stood out, but people weren't sticking out.
Yeah. Like you were drawn to that really great skater versus, or something that happened versus, oh my God, what was that? Right.
Yeah, like everything was strong, like
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, that unity piece is huge.
Hmm.
And again, I think it's easy to say that about obviously the world champions, but at the same time, there's things in here like even just this opening right here. They're all in a handhold. This is not a difficult position for younger skaters to achieve. And they start with like this really cool follow-up that's coming around and accentuating the music and it draws you in. None of that is something that you couldn't give to even a juvenile skater, right? So it's kind of just really remembering that sometimes the little things in kind of pulling out those pieces in the music isn't really difficult if there's purpose with it, right? And I think there's very small ways to do that, and sometimes the little intricacies that, especially with, less skilled skaters, they're not doing as much, right? So you're not asking them to do kind of turns at all points in their program. They might be, doing crossovers during this connection because that's all they can do during this. Well, what heads can they do to accentuate it, right? So the easy things that they have, layering in, and for me, I like to think of layering those pieces in at different times, where I don't give it to them all at once. Like maybe with this, you know, world championship team, they'd be given everything right at the start for this beginning. They wouldn't have to be layered in. Whereas maybe it takes 2 practices for my juvenile team to understand where they're going, how they're going, who they connect to, who are they going to see, right? So separating those pieces out for their brain. So maybe taking one practice to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And that's why I like to call it layers, right? So then the next layer is you might have given them the handhold, but you didn't really say, okay, when we're in this handhold, it should be fully extended. It's not just loose, or you can kind of go into more detail about why that handhold is there. So really kind of like thinking about how their brain is also going to conceptualize all these things, and maybe they don't need it all at one time, but they can handle it over time. That's another thing to keep in mind, because it's not necessarily difficult to keep it all together.
I had a thought, and I
Yeah.
mean, maybe it's potentially argumentative around what we just watched. I agree with Karen that I really like the nuance of their arm movements and their heads, and I saw maybe not as many facials as I would like, but I saw a few facial expressions. But I was noticing, Heather and I have worked together many years, and I do something called Six Ways of the Spine. Americanized Theater does something called Six Ways of the Spine. And I was noticing when they were using their arm movements, they oftentimes weren't allowing it to move into their shoulder blades and their back. So the arm movement would stop at the shoulder. And for me, I would like to see that actually move a little, especially for a team of this level. I'd like to see it go that extra mile and really move through the back so that you are getting a little bit more three-dimensional core body movement through some of those really cool arm movements. Like when they're reaching, I'd like to see it roll on through. So I actually was noticing that I almost wasn't getting quite what I wanted from some of those more musical moments with the arm movements. So sorry to be argumentative, but
No, I don't think it's argumentative at all. I want to say that this was posted either, I can't remember when it was posted based on when they were competing it. So it could have been earlier on in the
early on in the season
where they were kind of showcasing it, and it was just newer and they hadn't talked. So again, thinking of it as layers. I do remember seeing it later in the season, and I do remember actually thinking with this team that they had more of that. But that
so it may have built in.
could have been something that they needed to build on, because it's not an
That's
easy
not something
thing
that
to
necessarily
achieve.
comes naturally.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's always layers no matter what. I mean, that's a perfect example of how you can layer things and continue to add those three-dimensional movements. And, you know, and a lot of the things, like we can see those things, but there's other little nuances, like you were saying before, with the music maybe muted, right? It's not only like it's the dynamics of not only just the individual movement, but maybe, you know, with a team, you can actually sometimes see that variation in speed, right? So how can you show kind of a slow down and then a full-blown acceleration after that? And how can that be effective with your music, right? So not necessarily just focusing on, you know, the individual movement, but also how it can be a team movement. And I think that's the one thing that separates synchro out a little bit, and any kind of group ensemble pieces, is that you can play with some of those things and interaction between the skaters, you know, the intensity of that. You know, there's just other ways that you can kind of add depth and interest to the program, and highlighting that music with just a speed variation, for example. I think that that's a huge way to kind of convey it. I think it's easier to convey with a group of people, because there's moments where you can have some of the skaters be standing still and really show the force of other skaters coming through them, and it shows a different dynamic. So I do think that there's a lot of room for variety and you know, contrast of energy in those movements. So I think you touched on that a little bit earlier, when you could see that even with the music off, right, and not really hearing that music, you could feel that energy. And I think hopefully that's enhanced even more by the music, and it's not just there to be there. Anything else that you really, anybody else want to share something that they liked or wanted to see more of? Any questions about how you would, like how do you put this on your skaters? Anything like that we can talk about? Okay. Well, let's go to
We,
the next slide.
we
Oh, go
probably
ahead.
would both say we love tips. Like I have, so I'm from Texas
Yeah.
and there's not, we have a little bit of representation, but not a ton of representation in Synchro land. And we're still, trying to build our program. And so this kind of lends itself to, even the previous slide about formations and how you put it all together. We're trying to grow our program. So we're, starting another Aspire team this year and sending one group into the OJ land. And but our just to even get enough kids to get going, our Aspire team is 6 strong. So it's really tiny. And but we're just trying to make sure we can just keep going, and not turn anybody away. We want to just keep it happening. But I do think, with a smaller number, how to be effective, how to make them feel like theirs is just as important as a team of 12 and that
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I've said, like it's kind of knowing what your skaters need. When you're developing the communication that you can give your skaters, your families about their progression and what you see the future could look like, trying to communicate that in a way that is very productive and talking about small wins versus medals versus maybe we won, like trying to really kind of focus on the fundamentals of what you're trying to teach them from the synchro perspective. Because again, these skaters are brand new. They don't know anything about synchro. You're the point person for that. And trying to kind of look at the building blocks, communicate that, right? So I also, when I first started in with Starlights, they had a high level novice team when I came, and it was trying to get them to understand what it meant to go to the next level for them. And at the same time, the younger skaters, the bottom of the pipeline was dwindling as well when I came. So it was really trying to take, it worked in both cases, right? So letting them see the bigger picture, even at Aspire, where they could go, what this could turn into, if this, then that. And honestly, showing them something like a junior level team and video and say, this is what we're working toward, and this is what it will take. I know this is a lot for right now with Aspire, but this is the foundation. What are we working on here that's going to translate into the next level and the next level and the next level? And I know that's like very, it's not helpful because I'm just using like pronouns and whatever, like back and forth. But I think communication is key, and letting the parents know how invested you are by showing them all of these things and how you have furthered your knowledge about the sport and what you want for their skater, what they can get out of a team sport. We focus so much on coming out of COVID. The one thing that we focused on the most was team sport. All of our little banners out when we were doing recruiting were about what do you gain from a team sport. So it was confidence, social skills, anything you could, I mean, you name it, we put it on this. I think there was like at the end of the day, like 12 different things that we had as bullet points that were kind of all located around on this banner. And I remember going through it being like, this is exactly what parents want to get out of putting their child into a sport. And if you can communicate those things and giving them the benefit of life skills on top of their skating skills, you can communicate that, and I think there's no end to what you can kind of continue to build and create, and it'll gain respect from the parents and an investment, right? So I think there's ways you can do it from all different points of it, but I will say that looking at the high level and saying, okay, this is what we could be, but it's going to take a while, and you're going to be a part of something bigger by building it with us. So there's a lot of ways to do it, and showing them what the big picture could look like, I think is always a good thing, even though it might be way out of their league.
But you do make a good point, which is when you said, I listened when you said, even this really amazing team, there isn't any reason you can't, excuse me, you can't do a handhold and
Mhm.
start in a cool shape and then go from there. And we could do an exercise where it's like, show a great team. Can you find their circle? Can you find
Yeah.
their line? Can
Yeah,
you know,
I mean,
can you find their
video is
so
huge.
good?
Yeah. I mean, even still, like I think every season we were doing like IJS like seminars with parents, with skaters, just every year to kind of remind them, why are we doing all of these things? It's not just because it came out of Heather's brain and we have to do it. It's these are the things that all the teams are going to have to do. It's not something that's just hard for us to do, it's hard for everybody. So you can do so many things where you're communicating out information to get buy-in from your skaters and honestly respect and confidence in your abilities as well by sharing those things. Any other questions before we go to the next? I think the only other thing that's in my notes that I don't think I mentioned during this slide was um the other thing is about like repetition and variety. So one of the things that actually Kate taught me a lot about when we first started working together was motifs and kind of reinforcing repetitive movements, not necessarily repetitive, but along the same motif. But also then not being afraid to kind of use different variations and that's both of those pieces together are going to really keep that audience engaged. But that was one note I wanted to make because it was something that I learned from Kate and I greatly appreciated.
Love a motif. It keeps the character.
Sure does.
Are we going back to the PowerPoint?
Yes. So I think we are on musicality and expression. Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like it heard us say Barbie. Is that on your next? I feel like it wants to play Barbie next.
Hold on. It's just slow. There we go.
I know it doesn't like the YouTube. Okay. So musicality and expression, I think, are going to be our fourth deep dive. Obviously this is, the part when the why should become very clear for the choreography and the performance. Music is obviously the thread that holds the entire program together. Once the program is laid out and developed more, it's, kind of time to watch it through a new lens with, really only the music in mind. Where are there places I'm not hitting? Are there places where I want to see something that aren't happening? Really working with the group to connect their movements to the music, emphasizing musicality at all times. Typically when I'm doing that, I'm really focusing on the timing, the counts, the rhythm, making sure that they're kind of expressing the music like the emotional tone through their movements and their faces as well. That's another thing that Kate, you mentioned when you were watching the on the last slide, the team and wanting more of their face engaged. So those are all the things that are going to hit on that musicality and expression. Okay, so kind of on to this fun little exercise. We have about 15 minutes left. We have I wanted to play two pieces. And what I love about this YouTube, which I hope they work, if not, we'll try to send them to you, but it is a visual representation of the music. So this first one is obviously like we've all heard it before, it's Carmen. And, thinking of what I love about this is when I saw it, I started to think of this like visual representation as body movements and how like high and low notes could inspire body movements. The planes in which they would go through, the high, mediums, or lows. Um, you know, how could it inspire emotion? Does it require the backstory of Carmen? So let's go ahead and play it, and you can kind of, hopefully it won't get too sticky.
Okay, I am sharing my sound, so I hope it plays.
Not really doing it.
Is it working?
Not really. The white dots are supposed to be kind of what you're hearing, and they move across the spectrum of like.
Can you hear the music?
We can hear the music, but it's not as cool of a representation. Do you have the, wait, I don't think you have the link for this, do you?
I don't have the link for this one.
Because I think I put it correctly in. Let me see if I can get the link really quick. Because it's such a cool thing. I'm actually gonna get the link for the bottom one first. Which sadly, because we can't play it here, you're gonna see what the actual name of it is, which is sad, but you'll get the idea.
I can send these links out too in the email.
Well, I think this one is just I did a screen recording, so because I hoped it was gonna like work better.
Okay.
And it didn't. Okay, so this is, let's see. Okay, let's see if this works to share. So sadly, you're gonna see what the name of this song is, which was gonna be part of the exercise, but once you see it, you'll kind of understand how that visual representation and kind of see the ears and the eyes connecting along with the mind. So let's see, does it, doesn't want to. Ah, it worked. Okay. So if you want to watch this, it's just a visual representation. Okay, I think it probably should be over. It's 2 minutes. So yeah, sadly you get to see what it's actually called because I was hoping we could discuss what it looked like visually when you're watching it. And I think once you know what the name of the song is, which is The Diary of a Fly, and you watch that white dot kind of flicker around and just all of the things kind of come together. I love that so much. And then I believe if this the creator of that YouTube does a bunch of these different things. So you'll kind of be able to see the link that I'm sure that there's Carmen, there's all kinds of different things, but just having that visual representation and kind of understanding like how that musicality can work for you. So I had a blast kind of searching through and looking at these visual representations of music, and quite honestly was inspired by it. So I loved that Diary of the Fly. I could see it right away, and I was like, oh, this is just so great. And I'm like, how could you turn this into a synchro program? Not today, not today. Um, so yeah, I mean, so when we're talking about you know, just musicality in general, you could see how that works. The expression, you know, during this phase, trying to kind of encourage expression, you know, guiding the skaters to express, you know, the theme or the story through their body language. And then obviously their facial expressions is a huge piece of that. And that's kind of always the last layer I start to bring in, depending on what age or what they can manage all at the same time. Usually we talk a little bit about the facial expressions when we're designing and adding choreography into the programs, but we're not really kind of hammering it in. We're letting their brains kind of settle on other things and then letting the face kind of come along with that. If they're doing absolutely nothing with their face, that's different. We usually ask them to try to do what they're feeling, and whether or not that matches or not yet, that's kind of the next piece where we're in that mode when we're talking about expression, that last layer. And really trying to help them like internalize the music with their body movement, feeling it, right? So it's getting to that place of feeling. Does anybody else have any other questions before we shift into kind of the end of this? No? Okay. Then we'll go to the next slide.
I'm doing it. Hold on.
You're good. Okay, so now we're into performance. Okay, so like this, obviously, once we get to this piece of things, we're emphasizing synchronization, that oneness, that moving as one, you know, how do we feel each other? So not only am I responsible for feeling the music, my individual piece, how I fit into this program, but now also how I feel the rest of the group. Using, you know, what are the things that we use to kind of get through these last stages? Obviously, we're going to do a lot of video. We're going to do mirror work. We're going to do, you know, shadowing exercises. And in shadowing exercises, we sometimes will do that more when we're developing and kind of having them feel each other. It's more of an off-ice exercise versus something that comes out of the program to work on. And just kind of being able to feel each other. But that's going to really help with the uniformity of things. Like shadowing on the ice, we like to do at this point in time, we'll have, you know, if it's a circle element or a spin element, we will take half the team and you're responsible of watching your partner. What are the things that you might be doing that you're not sure if it's what you should be doing or if they're doing it? How can you work together to make sure that we all look the same? So kind of this is the stage I like to put a lot of onus on them as well. Where, you know, we are, and again, it could be for a higher level team, they're watching each other do the elements because they can handle that type of a feedback. We're talking about middle school to high school kids can typically help each other, and trying to make sure that during this phase that we're really focused on it being help versus critical. How can we do it more similar? Am I doing this? I don't know. I like how you did this. So trying to make sure it's really in a positive light. This is also kind of the stage that it's important for us as choreographers or coaches to be open to feedback from the group. Especially if they are, older, they're in that middle school, high school age. If something's not working, being able for you as a choreographer or coach to ask them, hey, what are you feeling doing during this? I noticed something's off, but I can't tell what. And, trying to figure out with that feedback from them, does it need an adjustment from the choreography? What could better suit them? Those types of things. And again, even with, younger groups, when we're talking about trying to get that uniformity, younger kids can count out loud, right? So making sure when they have one voice, they know they're all together. So that's something that I do a lot, as we're getting toward performance. And maybe some of them have more adrenaline than the others, and they're not counting, but others are. Trying to have them all count together brings back that kind of heartbeat for all of them to be together. And I use that quite a bit during this phase with younger kids. But yeah, I mean, this is also the part where we're talking about posture and energy, paying attention to those details. Timing, is the spacing correct between everybody? These are going to be between performances, even that you're going to be able to say, okay, this was a little bit off here, and this we need more expression. So kind of the first performance to the end performance is going to be very, you're going to utilize these tools as you go through the competitive part of the season. And again, like I said, positive, positive, positive. Everything can be made positive, where we are trying to, let them know that everything is, working and they're enjoying their performances. So again, stamina, consistency, those are all things that are going to be continual through this performance stage. All right, so we got a minute left. Let's go to the last couple of slides. So just our takeaways from this. Obviously, like I said, we talked about the 4 areas that we're going to take deep dives into, and that's kind of highlighted here. And that's okay. We can go on to the next slide.
I just want to make sure everyone knows that we do offer a lot of different educational programming. With AIT, we actually offer a certification program called Master Choreography Techniques, which we get many synchro coaches, as well as theater on ice, as well as singles coaches and choreographers to join us. It's a semester-long college-level course all about time, space, energy, and form, which are the 4 components of choreography. And we take dance concepts around these and we put them onto skating choreography. So really cool course to think about. We also have just opened this year our 6 Ways of the Spine certification. And we have some spots open in winter and spring 2025. And then, as you all know, this deep dive series will come up March and April next year. Otherwise, you can always join us at the American Contemporary Skating Festival. That's in Boston in June. We also have the Adult Weekend Skate Away, which is a retreat weekend for our artistic skating retreat weekend for adults, coming up in Austin in September. So if you have any adult skaters who might really be interested in that, we'd love to see them there. So we really appreciate you, Heather, for your time. Just so everyone knows, we just subsidize this. So if you really gained a lot from this today, we will send out a link to our donate. If you want to donate just a little bit for the class, that's always welcome, but not required. We do subsidize our free classes over the summer because we want learning and education around artistic skating to be accessible for all. So we appreciate you all being here, and thank you so much, Heather, for all of your expertise. We can't wait for the deep dive.
No problem. Thank you all. You've been great.
Thank you so much. It was really awesome.
Oh,
Thanks, Heather.
No
Thanks,
problem.
everyone.
Good night.